Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is CargoRex, building the Google search of logistics with my friend Blythe Milligan. How's it going, Blythe?
It's going good. You said my last name. It's correctly, I guess. It's for a lifelong Brumleve that just recently changed their last name to something a little bit more easier to pronounce. It's refreshing to not have to break down exactly how to pronounce my full name, so people have a better idea of what to say now.
So it used to be Blythe Brumleve?
Yes. See, you paused for a minute.
I was saying Blythe Brumleve.
And so now none of that exists anymore. I don't have to worry about that. It's very simple.
But also, I was looking at your name and I was like, I don't know why I had just one L in Milligan. And you go, oh, because I misspelled it. I was like, yeah, that's a rookie mistake. So
it's a process.
So congrats on your new marriage. And Mr. Milligan's a very lucky man.
Thank you. I like to remind him every day, but I am too, of course, because it's definitely a partnership.
So I think most people would recognize you as Blythe Brumleve or Brumleve. But anyway, Blythe, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Sure. So I am calling from Jacksonville, Florida. I have been working in logistics for a little over 10 years now. And recently, this is a project that I've had in my head for a few years now, but started actively developing it in June of 2024. We launched to a very limited sort of MVP audience in December of 2024 to get some early feedback and testing. But CargoRex, as you described, I'm attempting to do what Google and G2 and some of these other very large tech search engines have done in the past, but to do it for logistics, because there was a very obvious missing gap in these information silos that exist on the current web. And so I said, if it doesn't exist, then I'm going to go try to build it. And so that's here we are. And so with CargoRex, it's associations, it's technology, it's service providers, events, and creators, all within the logistics umbrella. And I'm attempting to bring that under one roof to help subject matter experts, researchers, leaders be able to stay ahead of the curve.
Yes. And as a podcaster, and I know you have the Everything is Logistics podcast, we're talking about podcasting and we're all out at Manifest. And there's a challenge with podcasters is people are looking for podcast related, and it's not just podcasters, it's all media, are looking for media associated with something they want to learn or someone they want to work with, collaborate with, advertise with, whatever. And it's hard sometimes to get that connection to happen through Google, because when you do Google, you get a lot of information, sometimes too much information, or sometimes it's, hey, these guys really don't understand the SEO, so you find them, but maybe they're not the right fit. And I think I used the term before we hit the record button. It's curated. And I think in a world of too much information, it's nice to have somebody who goes in and curates it. And it's like a garden where you're growing it and also trimming it back and updating it. Or like a CRM. You can create a CRM. It's only as good as the last update. And our business is always changing. We had another thing we talked about before we hit the record button was who bought who, who's changed their name. And that's also true of all the media companies. There's always a new podcast. There's always people. And by the way, I think that's a good thing where somebody says, I started a podcast all about COVID, and as COVID waned, on to the next thing. And we need that, but we also need to be able to find them.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us who get into this industry, we start off within one silo and we learn the ins and outs of that one silo. And it took me having the podcast, and maybe I'm sure you feel the same way, to discover how much there is to learn that we don't know. And logistics is just one of those onions. You can keep peeling back layers and just keep discovering more and more layers to it. And so because of that, I was like, it's impossible for these big conglomerates, these big sort of tech debt heavy companies to really have the nuance of what this industry is. A perfect example is if you go into Google right now and you try to ask, what are the top freight agent programs in the country? they'll give you a bunch of freight forwarders and a bunch of freight brokerages. And it's like they don't know the difference between just that simple phrase. And we know the difference between that. And using CargoRex, it's like, how do we bring in all of that information, but then also be able to give that industry expertise that is going to take it over the edge and actually be helpful, so that it's not just a bunch of businesses and a bunch of content on a site, but how do we make it helpful as far as the buying and the research journey that so many people are facing every month out of the year, multiple years, of where do I invest my time and my money, and how do I make sure that it's not going to be a mistake, whether it's an event or an association you're part of or a new TMS or WMS that you're going to invest in. How do you not waste time and money? And so that's my ultimate goal with CargoRex, is to help people save time, save money, and aid them in the research process by helping all of these different silos come under one roof and share these different conversations that are happening and events.
Yep. One other thing we talked about before we hit the record button was, if you Google something, if I was to Google like a movie star and I would typically go to Wikipedia. So I would type in the movie star's name and type in Wikipedia or Wiki, and you get it. You said to me that Google has a licensing deal with Wikipedia and who else?
Reddit as well. So Reddit is one of the bigger ones that they have a licensing deal with, because Google is, for anybody who hasn't been paying attention, Google has been the majority market share owner of search engine traffic. They've owned more than 90% of the Google search traffic, or just not Google. Google has owned the majority of the market share for just overall search traffic. So Yahoo, Bing, Brave, there are lots of other different browsers that are out there that have their own search engine. But for the first time ever, Google has actually recently dropped below that 90%. And so, what that tells us is that people are not finding what they want on Google, and they're going to other sources. So, they're going to social media, they're going to podcasts, they're going to YouTube, which Google does own YouTube. So, that was a very smart buy of them years ago.
They give priority to video also now. So if you Google that movie star, you're going to get video clips, whether you wanted the video clips or not. And by the way, a lot of us want the video clips, but I'm watching TV and I go, who is that movie star? Yeah, I want to see that guy die. I don't want a video on that. I want the Wikipedia. And I think also Google recognizes we can pull all this information from Wikipedia, and if I have a licensing deal, or pull this information from Reddit if we have a licensing deal, because Google doesn't want you leaving Google like you've always done. They don't want you clicking to Blythe's site or to my site like you should be doing.
And that was the deal that Google made with publishers for years and years, but now they don't necessarily know how to handle the influx of AI content. So they're dealing with they're fighting a war on two different fronts, where they have all of these users that are not finding what they're looking for. So they're going to other platforms to try to find the answer. But then they're also dealing with this other front, where it's all of this AI generated content, and they don't know how, they don't have the detection within their algorithm to find out what's real and what's AI created. A very famous example that happened, I think it was last summer, that an AI generated image of a man in Tiananmen Square was AI generated image, and Google showed it. If you Googled the phrase Tiananmen Square, their search algorithm was pulling up that fake image that was created, and it was just a very just flashlight in the dark moment that they don't know how to filter out this additional AI content that is just being flooded
By
in.
the way, I just saw this the other day. It was posted probably on Instagram or somewhere, but it was, somebody said, I asked, I don't know, one of the Chat GPT or Google Gemini, create a picture of the Beatles in the countryside having tea. And there's 5 Beatles and they're sitting at a table drinking tea. And the caption was, I'm not so sure which Beatle isn't real. Like, so you're looking, there was all kind of a conglomeration of the Beatles. So that was like, that's like Paul. Well, it could be John. I don't know. But there was 5 of them. And they all look like Beatles. I was like, okay. And that's, again, gets back to the problem. But they want, and they're getting increasingly more traffic to the AI stuff. So right now, if I was brand new to the business and I said, I need to do an LTL shipment, and I could go and say, give me the basics of less than truckload shipping, or I could go to Google Gemini or ChatGPT and say, please give me the basics. And let's face it, Google Gemini is pulling from an article that Blythe wrote 5 years ago on LTL shipping and not crediting you as that. And by the way, it might be more than just you, probably is. But if it's something very specific, they'll pull from an article from an expert who wrote it before and is not getting credit anymore. So before, when you wrote that article, it used to bring them to your website and you go, yeah, anyone looking for the basic.
You also were so the Google told you, like, the exact format, or they helped you guess. They never are super clear about how the best content ranks. So it's always been a little bit of a mystery from Google, but you still followed those rules and you did that for years. And then now Google is using that same information in their AI overviews. And so there's a whole different sort of shift in strategy that's taken place on, is SEO still valuable? I think it is, but in a different way. You have to attack it in a different way. Is marketing still value? Yes, but you have to attack it in a different way. We're dealing with a new information era, and the existing incumbents don't know exactly how to evolve with that changeover. It's a massive shift. And even when I'm talking about a massive shift, we're still dealing in an industry, especially logistics, that is trying to adapt slowly to all of the technology advancements that have been happening in this space, but also at the same time, all of the media and marketing space, that all of that evolution that has happened. And we're just talking about the last sort of handful of years. And it's been the last 5 years in logistics and also in marketing has massively shifted, more so than the previous 10 years combined. And so if you're not keeping up, if you're not keeping pace with all of these changes that are going on, then it's gonna that the reckoning is gonna come sooner rather than later. And so that's where it's just helping people stay up to date with the flow of information and specific to a niche where you know that the people who are operating that site, in this case, CargoRex, I know I only have my own certain level of expertise, but I'm also helping to other creators, help them rely on, or rely less on, the Google searches of the world and podcast discovery, which has always been a challenge. I'm trying to take those creators and help them with their content, put it exactly in front of the companies that are, whether it's a WMS or a TMS, or somebody is searching for a specific company, that relevant content from those creators is surfaced and allowed to be given and shown to those users who are doing that research. And so that hasn't happened in Google really for our industry ever, unless you knew how to play the SEO game. But what do you do when the SEO game has switched dramatically? And that's where people are getting lost.
Yeah, and I will say there was some book, it's really old. I read it when I was young, and it was Megatrends. And I remember one of the trends they talked about was high tech, high touch. And it was the recognition that the more stuff becomes more digital and more on the computer, on the phone, the more we yearn for connection, human connection. And I think, I consider you friends. I just saw you at Manifest. And I remember I did a lot of little interviews at Manifest. And I was calling it the Super Bowl for supply chain, or the supply chain reunion. And it is like that. And I feel like you've been on my podcast a number of times. I've gotten to know so many people, and it does feel like people who, if I go on LinkedIn, I have a deeper connection with all the people I've interviewed, obviously, but also it's made that LinkedIn smaller. So you might have all people following my content, and I might have connections, but that isn't the same as saying, oh, these 300 people I actually have an actual relationship with. I've texted them. I've talked to them on my podcast. We've talked about stuff. I meet them at the conferences. And I think that's what you're doing also. You're creating a community, and we're yearning for that. The more that I talk to Google Gemini and ChatGPT, the more I actually want to talk to somebody who understands my lame jokes.
Exactly, and I think that we're yearning for to bounce those ideas off of people who are in our similar position, but I think there's also an opportunity because if you scroll LinkedIn, you're only getting exposed to the people who are actively creating content on those feeds, and then allowing LinkedIn to determine what is appropriate for you to see and what not.
They know best for me, Blythe.
And so it's how do you we've never lived in a time where we've had so much information thrown at us and so many things vying for our attention that when we do have to sit down and make a decision, a business decision on what path to take, there are no other really resources within logistics that you can go to quiet out the noise and listen to a show of an executive talking about their solution and seeing if it's a good fit for you. And that or going to Google and trying to trust that the 10,000 Google reviews that they have on their page are all from real users or are they from their employees? You're not exactly sure. And so that I was very intentional with CargoRex in making sure that I'm surfacing information to people and it's up to them to consume that information and then make their buying decision. I didn't want to influence with asking for reviews and on different platforms and things like that. I really wanted it to be focused on the creators who are already doing an amazing job, like yourself, of making great conversations and surfacing those conversations to people who are looking for answers to the questions either in that specific segment or that specific company. And so that's really what I aim to do is to be what Google should have been to us.
It's a challenge because they're all trying to make money and they're trying to best they have shareholders. And we talked about earlier offline that YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, they're all doing things to make money. And ideally, they would like to say, if I let Blythe, and again, let Blythe have a big following, I want her to pay me. I don't want to give her a whole bunch of value for free. And you could argue, but I'm creating great content. And they're like, that's cool. Lots of people are creating great content. Pay us, or we're not going to give you those followers. And all the followers we have on social media don't belong to us. The email list we have, they belong to us unless we abuse them.
It's very similar to what Facebook did years ago. They said, you don't need a website. Just make a Facebook page and then that can be your website. And then what did they do after everybody did that? After numerous, obviously millions of companies did this, they flipped the switch, they turned the water off, and they said, if you want to access that same audience that you've spent time building, you're going to have to pay us for it. LinkedIn is now doing the same thing.
Oh, I pay them more than I ever did before.
But that's the thing.
And now they want me to pay more.
And they want you to pay on your personal profile as well. It used to be it just was your business page that they wanted you to advertise on. Now when I'm on my personal account, they'll ask me if I want to boost a post. And I'm like, "No, I don't want to."
I know. That's that again. And they're saying those are our thousands of people, Blythe, not yours. You don't own those. We do.
And that's where I think for CargoRex, that's my distinct difference is that all creators are free. They will always be free on the site. For businesses, you can submit your business for free, but we have additional premium profile features that you'll just pay an annual fee for analytics sake, integrations, things like that.
But it's well worth it, right?
Yeah, it's dramatic. It's a tenth of the cost of what somebody like a G2 would charge you for, and it's a direct audience.
I think what's cool about it is these terms I use a lot, but I think they're valuable. Is it's curated for one, but it's also you're building a community, and not everyone will join, but the people who do join, it'll be your people.
Yeah, and it's definitely it's a slow progress. Just think if you were to start to categorize logistics, like where would you start? It's been a very like sort of daunting. How do I categorize this big
The
industry?
nature of this logistics business is it's a catch-all that supports the supply chain. It's the tail of the supply chain. And by the way, I think inbound logistics categorized 46 different, I'll share this with you, 46 different categories, 5 major categories, 46 minor categories. And the 5 major categories was transportation, logistics, and then there was warehousing and fulfillment, and then there was specialized services. So there's 12 or 13 major supply chain verticals. Some of them have special services within those. But then there's also little things like environmental and yeah. I think I wrote a white paper years ago on it, those 46 things, because I was in this business from automotive, and I used to always ask the owner of the company I worked for, besides less than truckload and truckload like we're doing, what else is logistics? And he's like, no,
Whew. How much time you got?
ocean freight and rail. But the reality is he didn't have those boundaries. But anyway, the 5 major categories: transportation, logistics, warehousing, fulfillment, specialized services, and tech. Now, obviously, you can move tech underneath each one of those, but it is not everything is easy to categorize.
We have 62 categories on the site right now, and I feel like we'll probably have close to 100 by the end of the year.
Yep. And I think one of the challenges is, if let's just say right now I was looking for a visibility solution and somebody said, oh, Project 44 and 4 kites. And I go, okay, I want to make the right decision. So I know those guys. What else is in that category? Am I missing something that's a better fit for me? Those are great fits, don't get me wrong. But, or maybe you want to understand, what do all my customers have? What options are they using? The categorization is valuable all by itself.
It's quite daunting. I will admit that. And it's one that we're constantly reviving or readjusting to, just to make sure that we're covering all the grounds and all this. And that's what's cool about building this site and just having it live. I mentioned that we did an MVP test in early December, and then we pushed it out live to the public.
Minimum viable product,
Yes.
right?
And so just gathering that feedback
Because I
from
didn't
about
want some MVPs going, why wasn't I involved?
minimum viable product. So we launched it to we announced it to about 30 creators, or not 30 creators, but some creators were in that mix as well, but 30 founders who possibly create content as well, got their feedback and then made some improvements, and then went public with the launch on the day 1 of Manifest. And so that was a big hurdle, was to just get the product to the point where I can call it partially finished. I'm a firm believer that a website is never truly done, and with a website this size, I'll probably be working on this for the rest of my life, if I'm being
But
honest.
it is, but that's what makes it valuable, because those categories really matter. So there's people who, I say this all the time, might have picked a TMS, maybe their predecessors bought a TMS 25 years ago. And now they're looking and saying, it's time to upgrade, maybe. And if you go to Gartner or Forrester, some of those solutions, they all cost money, and maybe you want another perspective. And I think if somebody says, hey, here's the TMS category, and you can actually look and go, oh, okay, here's some that we didn't have on our list. And somebody said to me yesterday that there's over 1,000 transportation management systems out there.
It's very
I was
daunting.
like,
I'm
I was
only
like,
scratching
damn.
the surface, but I think we have a couple dozen TMSs on the CargoRex site, and I was like, I know this is not nearly complete or exhaustive.
You got all the cool kids on there.
We're trying our best.
Anyway, so Blythe, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you started. And it's not just CargoRex. You still have digital dispatch. So I'll say and also everything is logistics. Before you started all that.
So before I started all of that, born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida, I was working as an executive assistant in my mid 20s at an asset-based 3PL. So that's how I got started in logistics. I didn't go to school for it. My cousin worked in the accounting department, and she said that it was time for me to get a real job outside of waitressing. I loved waitressing. I was working at a golf course here in North Florida at TPC Sawgrass, and so I
Oh,
loved
nice.
what I did. Beautiful grounds to work at, and just amazing clientele that would always come in. And I loved what I did, but I was around 26 years old where it was like, okay, I need to actually get like a big girl job, because I didn't want to stay in service industry forever. And so when I started working in logistics, I also started up a sports and entertainment blog, and with the goal that I could help my friends understand, my girlfriends understand the things that I enjoyed, which was very selfish, of course. But this was also around the same time that social media really started to launch and gain traction. And so when that happened, I discovered that there were so many other women out there just like me who loved sports or loved gaming. And so that's how the website evolved. And so I built my own site. I wrote all my own content. I used to publish 2 articles every single day in both of those different categories. And so I have a long history of making content online. And then when my boss, who I was an executive assistant for, found out what I was doing on the side, that's when he said, "Why don't you start doing that for us?" And so I built up my first logistics website. I was very fortunate that my boss really invested in me, like school wise too. So I would go and take these classes on how to build websites, PowerPoint presentations, also inbound marketing. HubSpot had just launched. We joined with HubSpot. We were the second logistics company ever to join HubSpot. So it was very all sort of new, especially for logistics. And so it was a trial by fire of not only building out all of these different marketing programs, but also as an executive assistant, you are privy to so much just on the ground training, knowledge. You're witnessing very like high level executive conferences, not conferences, but meetings and I guess negotiations I'm trying to be careful with what I can reveal and what I can't reveal. Negotiations, any conversation that a CEO or a COO or a CTO would have, I was privy to those conversations. And so it was very much learning the ins and outs of an asset-based brokerage and learning it firsthand from them. And so did that, worked for them for 5 years. Unfortunately, the company did close. They had to shut their doors unexpectedly. And so that kind of left me in like a fork in the road of what do I do? Do I stay in logistics or do I pursue a media career? And I went and applied at a job. They were looking for a copy editor, a local magazine. And so I went and applied at that job and they hired me. They eventually promoted me to their editor in chief. And it was a North Florida culture and lifestyle magazine. So I was also exposed to a bunch of different ways of how to work in marketing, working with other editors, working with other writers, treating the magazine as a business of here are advertising partners and then here's our editorial coverage. How can we blend these sort of two things together? And then turning that content and adding it to our own company website. And so that's really where I got my feet wet with more professional style media broadcasting. I got involved with radio broadcasting. I co-hosted a show called Helmets and Heels for more than 5 years. It's the first football show in the country hosted by all women. That led into other opportunities within local news. But anybody who has ever worked in local media knows you can work a lot and you can get a lot of perks and a lot of connections, but you don't get paid a lot. And it got to the point where my savings and my severance from my previous job were running a little low and I needed to get some money flowing again. So I went back and worked for all of the people that were at the company that closed. A handful of them went and started up another logistics company, which is very common. That happens in logistics. They go and they just work for another company. So after a couple of years, when the money started running a little low, I went back to work for them. And so I worked and handled their marketing and had a little bit more experience, obviously, with everything that I had learned from the previous gigs. And then I got to the point where my boss, who was the same person as I was an assistant to, he was getting aggravated with me because he was like, "Look, there's nowhere for you to grow here." And I know that you are itching to grow. It's time for you to start your own company. It's time for me to push you out of the nest. And he did. And he was my first client. And so that's where Brumleve brand started. Very quickly, I learned that I needed to have a good niche because when you first start your own company, you don't know where your next check is going to come from. And so I was taking deals and trying to work out deals with all different types of companies. And I landed a few really good, a home builder, a pool company, and then also the logistics company. And so I had my first set of clients that would make me be able to breathe a little bit, a sigh of relief a little bit.
So you could live indoors, eat every
Right.
day.
I could eat regularly and I could pay for
Spoil
gas
yourself a
and
little.
yeah, I could pay for food and pay my rent and things like that. But then I learned very quickly that I was like, I can't be everything to everyone in every industry. Why don't we just stick in logistics, because that's the industry that we know, and there's not a lot of companies out there that can do what I do and understand the terminology behind it. And so that's where Digital Dispatch was born. And so Digital Dispatch is a website management and design company. So we help logistics companies get online and grow. And then from Digital Dispatch is where I started up the Digital Dispatch podcast in order to talk to my target audience and figure out what their pain points were and are. And so I could create solutions around that and create more content around those problems that they were facing. And so it did pretty well, and it caught the eye of FreightWaves, which is a media company within logistics. If you don't know FreightWaves, it's crazy. You should know FreightWaves. But they said, why don't you come over here and do that same show? Just do it for us. And so I did a show called
Oh, I forgot you did that.
the Cyberly Show. So I did the Cyberly Show for about almost 2 years. And then it got to the
I almost went over and did a podcast for them too. I remember I talked to Kevin and to, I forgot the young lady's name who was there. But yeah, I almost did that. But I was like, I'd already been doing this for a while, and I kept thinking, yeah, forevermore, I would just be known as the FreightWaves guy.
I was known for a little bit as the one of the FreightWaves girls. There's
Well, I
plenty of
forgot. I forgot.
So I had the Cyberly Show, but I was very blessed in the sense that they'd let me broadcast that show with them, but then they also let me have the content after each show.
They also get it. You can't help but learn. There are so many they have so many great programs now, but there's some people who say be known by your alumni. The alumni of FreightWaves have done fantastic.
And that I think too is also getting back to when I worked at the magazine, it was my first exposure to working with a team. And that was riveting for me because I had people to help with illustration and photography and editing and all of the things that you don't have when you work solo. And so after the magazine, when I stopped working for them, I still had access to a team through the radio station or the TV station. But then when you go and you start a podcast yourself, you're doing it all yourself. When you first start, you're doing it all yourself, unless you have a budget.
I never edited mine.
Oh, I was very, especially as a business owner, bootstrapped, like very cheap. And I felt that it was important for me to know the basics of it just in case I needed to get something out quickly.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with you early on with my podcast. You were on, I don't know, first 6 months or first year, whatever. And I remember I said something like, oh, yeah, I said, I don't like to hear my voice on the podcast. It might seem like I like to hear my voice, but I don't like to listen to it. And you said, oh, you had Jaws on the radio for years, and I couldn't listen for the first 6 months.
Yeah, I would hear the radio, and when my co-hosts were talking, I would listen. I was just fine. But when I started talking, I would turn the volume down. And then I would turn the volume back up to see if I was still talking, and then turn it back up whenever my co-host started talking. It was just, and I think a lot of people experience that. It's very common.
And it got even worse when they started putting video. And I was like, so we have video reviews every week. And I said to my team, are you deliberately getting bad thumbnails of me? Or is that how I look all the time?
The thing is, you don't know how you are on camera unless you watch your own tape. And so that was something that I had to get used to in order to find little ways to get better. And even I discover something new that I can improve every time. Oh, I should have said this a little bit differently. You need to stop using so many ums and ahs. You need to be a little bit more quicker about this delivery versus just rambling on. And so it was you don't learn how to do those things better unless you watch the tape. And just like a professional athlete, I use a lot of sports analogies because that's the world I came from. But just like a professional athlete, they watch their own tape in order to figure out where to get better. And I have done the same thing with myself. It did take a long time, though, to get used to hearing my own voice, but then also just noticing my mannerisms too when I'm on camera. There were so many times where I would be interviewing someone and my mouth would just be open.
No, I know. There are so many weird things where you're like, God, I look good in the mirror. And what happened when I went over here? And like right now, I'm like working on the lighting. There's always a new project with that. But I will say I started as a blogger, and I know you started as a writer too. And I think if there's one thing I learned from blogging is you have to start and not be as good as you want to be for a while. And then to some extent, after a while, when you write hundreds of articles, you go, okay, some are not as good as others, but you have enough success because you're persistent, not because you're good. And I think that's the same with podcasts. You find what makes more sense for you. And it's not to say that it's going to be wildly successful, but all we're ever looking for is our people. And you have to just start. And I think when I started the podcast, I was like, I had that mindset that this will suck for a while. And hopefully over time it gets less sucky and then someday good. And I've said this about football teams because I love football too, is you got to be good before you can be great. And you got to be great before you can be elite. And my friend Ryan Mann down there at Lean Solutions Group said something to me. He goes, before you can be good, you have to be consistent. And I love that.
Yeah, you really have to be obsessed with the process and you have to be able to be comfortable with launching and learning. And that's whether you're doing a podcast or a business. You have to be, if you wait until it's perfect, you've waited too long.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. And by the way, I also got in the habit when I was writing, I published everything. I would not, because every once in a while you're at the end of the article, go, you know what I should have written? Or you're like, no, publish it. I'll write the other article later. Anyway, let's switch gears, Blythe, and talk a little bit more about CargoRex. So you started CargoRex, and there's value for a whole bunch of different groups here. So first off, let's talk about the value that creators, and when you say creators, that could be the bloggers who are out there, the podcasters, maybe media companies, people who are following the industry and talking about the industry, people like me. What value do you provide for people like us?
So on CargoRex, it was very intentional to build out a program for creators that I personally would like and that I personally would join. For years, I've been approached by other companies, hey, join my network, be part of this and create content with me. And you really have to weigh the pros and cons. The pros with FreightWaves were tremendous. It was an easy say yes.
That was a slam dunk, yeah.
And but for other situations, especially in my sports background, there were other opportunities, quote unquote opportunities of people wanting to add my site to their network and you're going to get so much exposure, but essentially what they were doing was stealing traffic from me.
I heard somebody say this, I'm sorry, I heard Joe Rogan say this, that people would approach him even in recent years and say, hey, we'll help you blow this thing up. You give us half of the equity in it and we'll promote it on social media. We'll do this. We'll get it on TV. I could do that. And they're like, we know how, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, it's ridiculous. He goes, because you get a lot of those offers. And he was talking to Bill Burr, the comedian, and Bill Burr was saying, yeah, that's so crazy because you take the money early on and then you're beholden. And he says, then at some point you're like, why don't I own what I've created? And that's sometimes, and this is a whole nother topic, but I've had friends who just talk to me, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. I'm always say, yeah, go do it. Got to be a little careful though, if your company is going to own it. And by the way, if they're paying you and they're doing the editing and they are paying for, and they're maybe the only advertiser, it should be theirs. But just be aware that it's very difficult sometimes because you put a lot of your heart and soul into it. It's your personality, it's your name. And then when you leave, you don't get to take it with you.
Right. And that is something that you're exactly right, that every creator has to weigh what those decisions look like and the pros and the cons. I have learned the hard way that it is very important to own all of your content that you make. And so what we do at CargoRex is that we use what's called an RSS feed. An RSS feed is essentially a data feed that every blog, YouTube channel, podcast, each of them have their own specific, unique RSS feed. And so the way we do it is that we ask creators for their RSS feed and they supply it to us. We import their content. So you don't have to write it on the site. You don't have to publish it several times. You got enough things that you have to do. And so for us, it was how do we do this automatically that also retains the value and the ownership for the creators. Again, I wanted to build something that I would want to, that would be a no-brainer for me to say, yeah, you can have a link to my RSS feed. If my content is going to have greater exposure to the exact target audience that I'm trying to reach, that's a no-brainer. And it requires no additional work. And all the plays and downloads and views still count the same because we're pulling from your unique RSS feed. It's almost like an API connection. It's your data, but you control it, you own it. You can shut it off at any point that you want to. But my goal and my pursuit with this site is to make it so you never do that, and that I can put your content in front of the people who are searching for that solution or that specific company and elevate your content to help people in the research and the buying journey.
Yep. I like that because also there's a lot of podcasts out there and we all have a different bent. We all have a different, slightly different audience, slightly different way of doing things, which is great. I always say it's just very similar to your Spotify music. Just because you might have a country song doesn't mean you don't like a pop song or a rock song or a rap song, whatever you're listening to. And most people, if you look at their Spotify, it makes no sense. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I like it all. That's why I'm listening to it all. I'm only embarrassed about 20% of it.
That's the goal with Cargo. Like anybody can make a free account. It doesn't matter if you're a creator or a business owner, you can make a free account and you can search through the database. And if you find things that are appealing to you, whether it's a podcast episode or a business, you can save those different things to your own personal account. It's private to you. And then that way you can use it as a research tool. Like for my use case, and maybe this would be a good use case for you too, I like keeping track of the companies that I want to interview in the future. And so I use CargoRex to make a list on my free account that's private to me of interview targets. And then I can save those different businesses to that list. And so it makes that research process a little bit easier. Very similar to someone if they were doing a search for different WMSs or TMSs. Let me save a few of these to my account. Let me save a few podcast episodes. And then that way I can listen in my own time. The creator wins because they get more exposure to their content. The business wins because they get more eyeballs on their solution, but the power remains in the user's hands because then they decide what steps to take next. And so I was very thoughtful on how I built this site and how we can keep it bootstrapped because I didn't take any VC funding. This was all funded by me personally. And so being able to not have those biases that exist, because I think still for a lot of even like event producers, a lot of media companies, they're rightfully biased to their own solutions and to their own content, to their own articles. And I don't, there's still, I'm building this out on CargoRex right now, but I was shocked to know that there's no one single site that you can go and find out all of the logistics events that are going on in our space. One person lists their own events, another company lists their own events, but they're not going to list this company because it's a competitor with this product. And no, not on CargoRex. Everybody is welcome.
And I think I've heard this, and I know you have too, is every once in a while I hear somebody say, oh, anytime we have a new employee, we say, go listen to that podcast. And it's a nice thing to have if somebody says, hey, I'm new to the industry and I want to understand what industry podcast. And there's so many different flavors, they can check them all out in one space. What are you doing for a logistics company, whether maybe a transportation or a freight brokerage or 3PL? What are you doing for those guys?
Essentially the same thing, but on the business side of things. So all businesses, you can list your company on CargoRex for free. Now, we do have some premium options that are available that you can get access to additional analytics and contact forms. Integrate, you can list your integrations and associations that you're a part of as well. That aids in the buying research process. But number one, just for free, you can list your business and you can list it in front of the entire CargoRex audience. And so with that growing audience, then you can market your solutions to that audience through news announcements, white papers, case studies. You can also keep an eye on your competition, which I think is very valuable as well. You can learn what features that they're dropping through their news channels. We have YouTube feeds as well for each of the business pages. And so you can also broadcast your breaking news to that audience or your news maybe it's not necessarily breaking, but new feature announcements, new tools, things like that, integrations. You can announce that, but you can also keep tabs on what everybody else is doing, and you can pay attention to some of those market swings a lot quicker than if you were to just, randomly be scrolling LinkedIn and hopefully that new announcement from a competitor, from a company that you've been following that you're interested in, maybe you see it in your LinkedIn feed. This is a more controlled environment and it's more based on the user. We talked a little bit about before we hit record about how Google or G2 or some of these other platforms, they go a mile wide and an inch deep. My goal is to do the reverse for logistics, is to go that mile deep for the different solutions, the events, the associations, all of these things when you just enter the industry, or maybe were like one of us, where I only worked in an asset-based brokerage. It wasn't until I started the podcast or started the shift and the content that I covered on Everything is Logistics that I realized how much I didn't know. And every time I pulled back a layer on maritime or visibility or warehouse robotics, I realized how much more there is left to
Oh yeah,
learn. It's so
there's new
much.
categories. Like I was talking to Kara Smith Brown, and she said that they, with one of their clients there, she's from Lead Coverage, the co-founder, and yeah, she's great. And she said, we created a new category with Gartner. They convinced them we need a new category. And so many people are using tools like Gartner and Forrester to make decisions, especially about technology. That's where you hear the magic quadrant. Everybody's making those decisions. Not everybody wants to spend the money on a Gartner or a Forrester report. And also, I think if there's a free resource or relatively inexpensive resource, and I can be listed in a category of all transportation management systems, not everybody needs the magic quadrant. But the problem we all have is when, let's just say you mentioned robots. Most people have never, if you're purchasing, if you're a warehousing company, most people have never bought robots, or if you did it one time and you don't know what's out there, you need to go somewhere where there is more information about what's going on in the industry. And if you bought them 5 years ago, you might as well say, I have no idea what's going on with robotics. And because it's changed a lot. That's the nature of all our businesses. And you're not going to get there with Google. And I don't say that in a mean way. It's just that's not their function right now.
I feel like this CargoRex really is like the culmination of my entire logistics career under one roof, where I'm trying to really be that resource for creators and also businesses at the same time. But I'm only one person. I can't interview 200 people a
No,
year,
Blythe.
even a year. This pain. There are over 100 logistics creators, and we're barely scratching the surface as far as content
Yeah.
is concerned.
Yeah. And by the way, I always say the reason my podcast exists and yours too, I think, is people want to hear from the experts. They want to hear from the pros. They want to hear from the veterans, the founders who understand their business better than anyone, who should better talk about it than them. You can learn about truckload from me or from you, but better to hear it from a guy who says, yeah, I started a truckload brokerage and a trucking company, and here's what we do.
Exactly.
And by the way, I love founder stories. I'm sure you do too. But everybody's story. You don't necessarily have to be that billionaire founder to be very interesting and inspiring to somebody.
Exactly. There's what's the phrase? There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And so I'm hoping I don't know if there's a lot of ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly an expert in that regard, but I can maybe listen to a bunch of different podcasts that can explain the
Exactly.
process and then make that decision myself. And so that's where I'm attempting to break down the information silos. And with CargoRex, we just launched into the public, so we're less than a month old at the time of this recording, and we're nowhere near where I want to be, but we will get there. And I think it was part of that, just similar to what we just talked about with podcasting. You have to launch, you have to learn, and you have to keep refining.
I think also the nice thing about if you join now is you get to influence Blythe on direction. That's true because they'll say, Blythe, this is cool, but I'd like this and this. And I'll talk to you a year from now and your business will be even better. and it'll have gone to directions that you didn't anticipate because somebody asked for it.
Exactly. I send out annoyingly to any person that signs up on the site. I'm like, please fill out this survey. And I know the overwhelming majority of people will not fill out a survey because it takes up too much time. But I'm still going to ask, just on the rare occasion that somebody does have time or they
Well, I'll
do
fill it
have a
out,
good
Blythe.
idea and they want to let me know what they want to see from the site. Because very similar to what you said, this is a community driven effort. I want, if I had one goal, it's to have all of the creators and all of the businesses that exist in logistics be under this platform. So then that way we can share, break down these information silos, and then be able to put that content and put that research in front of the user's hands and then let them make their best choice and their best decision from that information.
Yep. So you also work with associations. What are you doing for why don't you put them in another two separate, but associations and events, because they're sometimes tied.
Associations and events is very similar to the businesses. So you can create a free event or add your association to the directory as well. And so from that lens, I can't tell you how many times that I probably can count on how many times I've been to join an association or I've gone to an event that an association has hosted and it just wasn't the best fit for me. And conferences take a lot of time, they take a lot of energy, and they take a lot of your budget too. And so, do you want to make that decision again in the future? So,
Yeah.
what I'm aiming to do, especially from associations, because a lot of these associations are nonprofit, they work on very small margins, small revenue, but they're providing an educational resource as well to the industry and a lot of networking connections as well. And so, if you're just breaking in, maybe to use my use case, for example, say I spent years in asset based trucking. What if I wanted to get into warehouse robotics? What associations should I join? What events should I go to? And so, as we continue to build out CargoRex, we hope to answer those questions for you so you can save that time and money and invest in the things that make the most sense for you. And that's where I'm just on a constant striving for this goal is to just make sure that your time is well invested, whether it's an association that you join, an event that you go to, or a piece of software or an insurance company that you invest in. I want to try to put that information in front of you to allow you to make the best decision that works best for you.
I love it. I love it. I'm going to wrap this bad boy up. I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. I'm talking to my friend Blythe Milligan, Mrs. Milligan, as she goes by, and we're talking about CargoRex building the Google search of logistics. And it's really talking, the purpose of CargoRex is you can't get all the information you need with Google. You also don't get a community with Google. You don't have context with Google. If you type in logistics companies, you'll get logistics companies, but you're going to get those that are sponsored first, and it's not going to be particularly useful. Finding events that way, finding podcasts that way, very difficult. So CargoRex, and I'm going to put this in my own words, it's a community that you're building, but it's going to be all curated. So there's going to be rhyme or reason to the categories and rhyme or reason to the organization of the site. And this is for I know your podcast is called Everything is Logistics, but this is Everything is Logistics too.
Literally and
So
figuratively.
yeah, exactly. And so this is good for the creators who will have more opportunities to connect with all those companies that they want to have on their podcast, to maybe as advertisers, collaborators, guests, whatever that relationship is. They get that exposure, the greater awareness, more listens, more downloads, more views. We all want that. It's also for the logistics companies who just have another place on the internet that they have an island of content and connection.
And their target audience too, which is very challenging to find in the sea of LinkedIn and in a sea of Google.
Yeah. And by the way, this is so interesting about our business. Virtually all the listeners on podcasts, 60, 70% of the podcast listeners for all logistics podcasts are the logistics providers. But who they are, all the logistics providers, like, I would like to just speak to shippers. You're like, there is no such podcast. There is no shipper podcast. And if there was, it would only have logistics people on it.
Right.
That's the nature of it.
And every time they'd be on the show, they'd probably get 20 brokers.
Yeah,
hitting them
they
up and
get text
cold
message
emailing.
the entire time. The entire time they're on, they're getting hit with messages. This is, again, good for associations, good for events. Anybody who's a provider in this business, anybody who's and if you're a shipper, it's a good place to go find and research the best partners for you. Anyway, Blythe put a big old bow on this one. Final thoughts on the topic.
I know it's a daunting task to try to categorize logistics, but I think with my experience, and I think with a lot of the creators and a lot of the subject matter experts that have gotten early opinions on, it's a solution that is much needed. It's nowhere near being done. So we're less than a month old. So there's lots of improvements. I have a notebook off to the side of my desk that you cannot see that's filled with improvements that I want to make to the platform and just help people explore, discover, and evolve because there's lots of silos that exist. I think I've mentioned silos a few times, but we all know that they exist within this industry. And I want to try to break those down. And I think we can do it with the spread of information that is applicable to our industry. And so join me, hopefully, at CargoRex.
I love it. So, Blythe, I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your website, your new one, plus a link to Digital Dispatch. You're still doing website design and management. I know that team's pretty dialed in. And you still have the Everything is Logistics podcast. So please send me a link to all those, and I will include those in the show notes.
Awesome. Do. Yeah. It's everythingislogistics.com or cargorex.io or digitaldispatch.io. It's a bunch of different sites.
Yes. Yeah. Give me those links. We'll put them in the show notes. I was going to ask you what conferences I'll see you at, but I know you haven't decided, and nor have I. There are so many great conferences, and I would love to go to all of them, but I have not caught up from being at Manifest.
Same.
In fact, I haven't caught up from being at last year. I went to 3 conferences, all great. 3 months in a row, I went to 3 different conferences. I swear my life is behind forevermore now.
It's a constant game of preparation for the next one and catching up on the last one. I feel like I'm in that state right now, and I just have to remind myself to give myself a little bit of grace and prioritize.
Yep. By the way, when you go to a conference like Manifest and you get the great list of, hey, here's all the people you should be following up with, you always think I should hit them up with an email. Hey, great meeting you or whatever, or maybe it's an email blast, whatever it is. Notice you only get a few. And I think it's because everybody's behind. That's just the nature of our lives right now.
Yes. And I do have a note off to the side that I made a bunch of PR announcements for CargoRex during Manifest. And I said, well, I probably should send those out again because everybody was at Manifest. Who has time to really read their emails when you're trying to talk and maneuver among over 6,000 people? So it's a daunting task. Well, like I said, we just got to get better at prioritization. And I say we, and I really mean me. So
it includes me too.
I guess a progression.
Yeah, I love what you're doing. I think this is a huge project, but I think also I am going to sign up. I'm going to try and do that this afternoon.
We got to get Logistics of Logistics on there too. You have such great content, and
Thank
lots
you.
of people would
Thank
love to
you.
see it and listen.
I think the advantage for anyone listening who says, hey, I'm thinking about joining that is when you join early, you are able to influence the direction of it because this is for the people who are joining.
There is a help us improve tab on every single page knowingly on the site. And then I'm also emailing, asking people to submit their thoughts. Now, a very small fraction of people will do it, but that valuable feedback is exactly what I need to know because in the world of building websites, you think you have a good idea of how people will navigate a site.
Yeah.
You have no idea until you actually watch how people navigate a site. What's clear to you might not be clear to somebody else.
Yeah. And I always think as a content creator, you are used to just iteration, constantly iterating, constantly changing the words. And as well as I do, websites are never done. When people say to me, oh, I like your website, Joe, I always go, And my first thought is, all I see is the flaws.
Right.
All I see is what's missing.
I'm exactly the same.
In my mind, all I see is this mess that somebody left, and that's me. But I think that's a good way to get better. So if you have that mindset. Anyway, thank you so much, Mrs. Milligan, for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. And it was great to catch up with you at Manifest and great to catch up even more on this chat.
Yeah. Congrats on the new biz and on the new marriage.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yep. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. I know I always say it, but I really mean it. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward.
You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.